I was born into a family so powerful that people stood when my last name was spoken. But the night I stood in front of a mirror, wearing a dress I have chosen for love instead of legacy, I knew something terrible was about to happen. Because in my world, love was a weakness, and I had just committed the greatest betrayal imaginable. The rain was hitting the windows of my penthouse like it was angry with me. Lightning flashed across the city skyline, the same city my family had helped build, control, and own for decades. I could see our name glowing on the side of a skyscraper across the street. Harrington Group, my family's empire. Banks, real estate, political influence, media. Power passed down like inheritance, or like a curse. And yet, at 28 years old, standing barefoot on imported marble, all I could think was, why does none of this feel like mine? My phone buzzed again. I didn't have to look to know who it was. Mother. She had been calling every 15 minutes since noon. I finally answered. "Where are you?" she asked. Calm, controlled, dangerous. "At home," I said. There was a pause. "You were supposed to be at the engagement dinner." "I know." Another pause, longer this time. "You are embarrassing this family." The words landed exactly the way they were meant to, sharp, precise, practiced. "I just needed time," I said, "to think." "To think," she repeated, her voice cold now. "There is nothing to think about. You were born for this." Born for this. A political marriage to a man who looked good on magazine covers and spoke like a campaign ad. A man who shook my father's hand like a business deal already signed. A man who had never once asked me what I wanted. "I can't marry him," I said, quietly. Silence. Then her voice dropped to a whisper that scared me more than yelling ever could. "You will not ruin everything we've built for a feeling." I closed my eyes, because that feeling had a name, and if she ever found out who he really was, what he really did, where he really came from, I wouldn't just lose my inheritance, I would lose my family. I met him 6 months earlier in the most ordinary place imaginable, a bookstore. No security, no assistance, no expectations. I was wearing jeans and a hoodie, invisible for the first time in my life. He didn't know who I was. He just smiled and said, "Are you actually reading all of those or just pretending like everyone else?" I laughed, and just like that, something inside me cracked open. No one had ever spoken to me like that before. No reverence, no fear, no agenda. Just curiosity. If I had known that moment would eventually cost me everything, my name, my family, my safety, my place in the world, I wonder if I still would have smiled back. Because love didn't just change my life, it set it on fire, and the flames were already spreading. My name is Naomi Harrington, and before anyone ever knew who I truly was, they knew my last name. Harringtons didn't introduce themselves. People already knew. We were the family politicians called before making decisions, the family judges nodded to in courtrooms, the family whose donations built hospitals and whose silence destroyed careers. Power didn't scream in our house, it whispered. I grew up in a mansion with 22 rooms and not a single safe space. Every hallway had cameras, every dinner had rules, every smile had meaning. My father, Caleb Harrington, believed emotions were liabilities. He never raised his voice, he didn't need to. When he spoke, rooms adjusted themselves around his expectations. Legacy is not something you enjoy, it's something you protect, he used to say. I learned early that love was conditional. Praise came when I performed well, affection came when I obeyed, silence came when I disappointed, and silence was the worst punishment of all. My mother, Evelyn Harrington, was elegance sharpened into a weapon, always composed, always flawless, pearls at breakfast, heels in the house. She corrected posture the way other mothers corrected spelling. She never hugged me, but she adjusted my appearance constantly, as if fixing the outside would eventually fix the inside. "People are watching," she would whisper whenever I laughed too loud. "Harrington women do not draw attention that way." I was groomed, trained, polished. Private schools, language tutors, etiquette classes that taught me how to sit, speak, and breathe properly. But no one ever taught me how to feel. By my 20s, I was exactly who they wanted: educated, controlled, presentable, and completely empty. I attended galas where my name opened doors before my mouth did. I shook hands with men who appraised me like an asset. I smiled through conversations that felt like negotiations. At night, I lay in a bed big enough for 3 people and felt completely alone. The engagement to Marcus Whitmore was announced before I was ever asked how I felt. Marcus was perfect on paper: political family, clean reputation, expensive suits. He spoke about our future like it was a merger. He never noticed when I went quiet, never asked why I flinched when he touched my arm. "You'll grow into it," my mother said. "Love comes later." But something in me knew if I married Marcus, I would disappear. That's when I started escaping. Small things at first: going out without security, taking my own car, wearing clothes no one approved beforehand. And then, one afternoon, I walked into a bookstore. No cameras, no expectations, just shelves full of stories about people who chose their own lives. That's where I met Daniel. Daniel didn't belong in my world, and that was the first thing I loved about him. He worked 2 jobs, one at a community center, another fixing computers at night. His hands were rough, his laugh was unfiltered, his clothes didn't care about trends. He listened when I spoke, really listened. When I told him I felt invisible, he frowned. "How?" he asked. "You take up space, you just don't know it yet." No one had ever said that to me before. With Daniel, I wasn't Naomi Harrington. I was just Naomi. We talked for hours that first day, about books, about music, about the weight of expectations. I never told him my last name. He never asked, and somehow that felt like freedom. For the first time in my life, someone wanted me, not my future, not my connections, not my family, just me. And for the first time, I let myself believe that love might actually be real. But power doesn't like to be ignored, and the moment I chose happiness, it started preparing its punishment. Love doesn't arrive like a warning. It comes quietly, softly, and by the time you realize how deep you are, it's already too late. Daniel and I didn't fall in love dramatically. There were no grand confessions at first, no promises, no labels, just moments. Coffee that turned into dinner, conversations that lasted until the lights outside dimmed, silences that felt safe instead of awkward. With him, I could breathe. I told him things I'd never said out loud: how my life felt pre-written, how my smile felt rehearsed, how sometimes I felt like a guest in my own body. He never tried to fix me. He just listened. And somehow, that healed more than anything else ever had. The first time he kissed me, it wasn't planned. We were sitting in his car outside my building. Not the penthouse, but a smaller apartment I kept hidden from my family. Rain again. Always rain when my life was about to change. I was laughing about something meaningless when I stopped mid-sentence. He was looking at me differently. Not like I belonged to him, like he was afraid to lose me. "Naomi," he said quietly, "tell me if I'm crossing a line." I didn't answer. I leaned in. And the moment his lips touched mine, I knew. This wasn't just love. This was rebellion. For months, we lived a double life. By day, I was the Harrington daughter, composed, distant, obedient. By night, I was a woman learning herself for the first time. I told lies to survive, meetings that didn't exist, dinners that lasted longer than planned, phone calls answered in whispers. Every lie tasted like guilt, but every moment with Daniel felt like truth. The incident didn't happen all at once. It happened in pieces. First, my mother noticed changes. "You're distracted," she said over breakfast one morning. "You've lost weight." "I'm fine," I replied. She studied me too closely. Harrington women are trained to spot weakness, and love leaves fingerprints. Then came the invitation, a charity gala, mandatory attendance. "Marcus will be there," my father said. "This is important." I wanted to refuse, but refusing was not an option in my family. That night, dressed in elegance that didn't feel like mine, I stood beside Marcus as cameras flashed, and across the room, I saw Daniel. He wasn't supposed to be there. He had been invited by the community center, one of the organizations funded by our foundation. He was wearing a borrowed suit, nervous, out of place. And the moment our eyes met, everything inside me froze. Marcus followed my gaze. "Do you know him?" he asked. "No," I said too quickly, but it was already too late. Daniel's face changed when he saw me standing next to Marcus, when he realized this wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a lie. Later that night, I found him outside near the balcony. He didn't look angry, he looked hurt. "You didn't tell me who you were," he said quietly. "I wanted to, I just didn't know how." He laughed once, bitter. "So this is your world, and I'm just something you visit." "That's not fair," I said, tears rising. "You're my choice." He shook his head. "Naomi, your world eats people like me." We didn't break up that night, but something broke. And power noticed. 2 days later, my father summoned me to his office. No anger, no accusations, just facts. "We ran a background check," he said calmly. "Daniel Brooks, community organizer, tech support, no assets." I went cold. "You had him investigated?" "You brought him into our orbit," my mother added. "That made him our responsibility." My father folded his hands. "This relationship ends immediately." I stood up. "No." That word echoed louder than anything I had ever said in that room. My mother's eyes widened. My father tilted his head. "You don't understand what you're risking." "I do," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm risking a life I don't want for one I finally do." Silence. Then my father stood. "You are choosing a man," he said, "over your name." "Yes," I replied. And just like that, I crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. That night, Daniel's phone stopped working. The community center lost its funding. His landlord received a notice. And I realized this wasn't just disapproval. This was war. Power doesn't explode when you challenge it. It tightens, quietly, systematically, until you can't breathe. Daniel tried to pretend everything was fine, but I could see it. In the way he checked his phone too often, in how his jokes came a second too late, in the silence he didn't know how to fill anymore. "They cut the funding," he told me one night, sitting on the edge of my couch. "The center's closing in 3 weeks." My chest tightened. "I'm so sorry," I whispered. He didn't look at me. "I know it's not your fault, but somehow it still feels connected." Because it was, and we both knew it. My family didn't confront me again. They didn't need to. The punishment wasn't meant for me. It was meant for him. Daniel lost one contract after another. Clients stopped calling. Opportunities vanished without explanation. People smiled apologetically and said things like, "Your name came up," or "It's not a good time." I watched the light in him dim, slowly, painfully. And for the first time, love felt like guilt. At home, the atmosphere changed.
My access cards stopped working. My accounts were temporarily frozen. My assistant stopped answering my calls. At dinner, my parents spoke to me like I was already gone. No yelling, no drama, just erasure. "You're not thinking clearly. This phase will pass," my mother said one evening. "This isn't a phase," I replied. She sighed, almost tired. "It always is." Marcus, however, did not disappear. He became more present, more attentive, more threatening. "This doesn't have to be difficult," Marcus said during a private lunch. "Your family is willing to forget this if you cooperate." "I'm not a deal," I snapped. He smiled. "No," he said calmly, "you're leverage." That word followed me everywhere after that. Daniel tried to pull away, not because he stopped loving me, but because he loved me too much to watch himself become collateral damage. "They're destroying everything I've built," he said one night, "and I can't even fight back." I reached for his hand. "We'll figure it out," I said. He shook his head. "You have a safety net," he replied. "I don't." That hurt more than anything my family had done, because it was true. Then came the night when everything collapsed. Daniel was arrested. No warning, no explanation. I got the call at 2:14 a.m. "Naomi," his voice cracked, "I need you." I arrived at the station shaking. They said it was fraud, misuse of funds, anonymous tip, lies wrapped in paperwork. I knew my family hadn't just crossed a line, they had erased it. When my father came to see me the next morning, he looked almost disappointed. "This didn't have to happen," he said. "You did this," I replied. He shook his head. "You did," he corrected. "You forced our hand." I stared at him, and something inside me died. Daniel was released days later, but he wasn't the same. Neither was I. We sat in silence in his apartment, surrounded by boxes. "I can't do this anymore," he said quietly. "I can't watch my life burn so you can prove something." I wanted to scream, to beg, to confess that I would give up everything if it meant saving him. But he didn't need promises. He needed peace, and I was the storm. When he left, he didn't slam the door. He didn't shout. He just said one thing: "I hope one day you're free." And then he was gone. That night, my mother called. "You've had your lesson," she said. "Come home." I hung up because I realized something terrifying. Love hadn't just cost me Daniel. It had shown me exactly how far my family was willing to go. And I knew there was more they weren't telling me.
Pain can make you numb, but truth? Truth wakes you up. For weeks after Daniel left, I moved through life like a shadow. No family, no love, no future, just silence. The kind that presses against your chest until breathing feels optional. I stayed in the small apartment, the one my family didn't know about, eating takeout and replaying every moment in my head, wondering where I should have fought harder or walked away sooner. That's when I received an email. No subject line, just an attachment. It came from someone inside the Harrington group, someone who knew me well enough to feel guilty. The file was labeled Brooks, Internal Review. My hands shook as I opened it. What I read made my stomach turn. Daniel had never misused funds. The numbers were clean, the records flawless. The anonymous tip was generated internally, signed off by a shell company, owned by my family. I kept reading. There were emails, conversations, orders. One line froze my blood. Ensure separation is final. Emotional leverage no longer effective. They weren't trying to scare him. They were trying to erase him from my life, strategically, legally, coldly. But the worst part? This wasn't the first time. There were other names, other people, partners, friends, employees. people who had gotten too close to Harrington blood and paid the price. I wasn't special. I was just the next lesson. That night, I confronted my mother. She didn't deny it. She poured tea like we were discussing weather. This is how powerful families survive, by controlling variables. You destroyed him, I said, my voice breaking. He's still alive, she replied calmly. That's mercy. I stared at her, and for the first time in my life, I didn't recognize the woman who raised me. Then she said something that shattered what little was left of me. Do you know why we were so afraid of him? She asked. I shook my head. Because he made you brave, she said, and brave women don't obey. I left the house shaking because suddenly everything made sense. My childhood, the control, the conditioning. This wasn't about protection. It was about ownership. I found Daniel days later, not to beg, not to apologize, but to tell him the truth. I showed him everything, the documents, the emails, the proof. He read quietly. Then he closed the laptop. So it wasn't all in my head. No, I replied. It never was. He looked at me then, really looked at me. You could expose them, he said. I swallowed. I know. But you'd lose everything. I nodded. And for the first time, that didn't scare me, because I finally understood the cost. I had been rich my entire life, but I had never been free, and freedom, I realized, was worth more than inheritance, worth more than protection, worth more than a name that only existed to cage me. I went back to the apartment and packed one suitcase, just one. No designer clothes, no jewelry, no legacy, just me. And before dawn, I sent one final email, not to my parents, to the press. By noon, the story was everywhere. Internal corruption, abuse of power, silenced victims. The Harrington Group's stock plummeted. Phones rang unanswered. Lawyers scrambled. And my father finally called. His voice wasn't calm this time. What have you done? He demanded. I took a breath. The right thing, I said, and hung up. But truth has consequences, even when it's necessary, and mine were just beginning. When the story broke, it didn't explode. It bled, slowly, relentlessly, into every corner of my family's empire. News anchors spoke my name with caution. Naomi Harrington, whistleblower, heiress, traitor. Former allies suddenly remembered meetings they'd once forgotten. Old employees found their courage. Lawsuits appeared like cracks in glass. And just like that, my family's power began to look fragile. I lost everything in 48 hours. My accounts were frozen permanently, my access revoked, my last name turned radioactive. Friends stopped calling. Invitations vanished. People crossed the street when they saw me coming, not out of fear, but discomfort. I had exposed something ugly, and no one likes the person who holds up the mirror. I moved into a studio apartment with borrowed furniture and secondhand dishes. For the first time in my life, I checked price tags. For the first time, I stood in line. For the first time, no one knew who I was. And strangely, that felt like relief. My parents didn't fight publicly. They didn't need to. Their lawyers spoke for them. But once, just once, my father asked to see me. He looked smaller, older. Power was his armor, and now it was cracking. You've destroyed this family, he said quietly. I met his eyes. No, I replied. I told the truth. What you built couldn't survive it. He studied me. You think this makes you strong? I thought of Daniel, of fear, of silence. Yes, I said. I do. He stood up and walked away. That was the last time I saw him. Daniel and I didn't run back into each other's arms. This wasn't that kind of story. Healing doesn't rush.
It rebuilds, slowly. We met for coffee sometimes, talked carefully, honestly, without illusions. "I'm proud of you," he told me once, "but I need time." I nodded. So did I. I found work at a nonprofit anonymously. No resume advantage, no shortcuts, just effort. Some days I failed. Some days I cried in bathrooms, but every night I slept without fear. No handlers, no surveillance, no expectations I hadn't chosen. The trial came months later, not for my family, power bends laws, but for individuals who had signed documents. It wasn't justice, but it was accountability, and sometimes that's where change starts. One evening, alone in my apartment, I stood in front of the mirror again. No marble floors, no city skyline, just me. And I smiled. Not because life was easy, but because it was honest. I lost wealth, protection, status, but I gained something my family could never give me: myself. I used to believe love was something you earned, something granted to you when you behaved correctly, when you fit the role, when you didn't ask for too much. That's what I was taught. Now I know better. Love isn't permission, it's truth, and truth doesn't care how powerful your last name is. Sometimes people ask me if I regret it, if I regret losing the money, the comfort, the protection, if I regret choosing a man who couldn't save me from the fallout. I always answer the same way. I didn't lose everything. I lost the things that were never really mine. Daniel and I never married. We didn't need to. What we shared changed us both. He went on to rebuild the community center, slowly, honestly. I helped when I could, quietly, not as a Harrington, as Naomi. My family still exists in headlines. Power always does. But my name doesn't appear there anymore. And that's exactly how I want it. Some nights I walk past the old bookstore, the one where everything began. I step inside sometimes. No security, no disguise, just a woman choosing her own story. If you're watching this and you feel trapped by expectations, by family, by fear, I want you to hear this. You are not selfish for wanting love. You are not weak for choosing yourself. And you are not broken for walking away from power that costs you your soul. I was born into a powerful family, but the only thing I ever wanted was love. And yes, it cost me everything. But for the first time in my life, everything I have now is real.